welcome to the first session of SMI Academy, where we will be discussing the improvements that are found in SAP's Business Intelligence 4 over the previous version, Business Objects XI 3.1, which is what I believe the majority of SMI customers are currently using for their reports. This is now what they call the Business Intelligence Launchpad. So this is how you will actually access your reports. So this is the replacement for InfoView, as I said earlier. Some of the things, as I said, we have now this tabbed interface. So although you couldn't see it previously, now you can see that I have a couple tabs here, and I can open new reports in separate tabs. So for instance, I can open up this chart demo report simply by double clicking on it, and it will open up in a new tab. And you can see some of these buttons here that I mentioned earlier. We can put it into a new window. Or we can pin it so that it's persistent between sessions, or we can, of course, close it. And in addition to having one report open, I can have as many reports open as I like. So I could also choose to open this report. And so now I have the chart demo report and the this new report open at the same time without having to open multiple browser tabs as we would have had to do previously. So there you can see I've got two reports open, and as I was saying before someone let me know that the screen wasn't being shared, I have them open in view mode. So this is, again, this is what your light users would be familiar with, where they can view the report, they can refresh it, they can reply to prompts, but they can't actually modify the report. What's nice in this version is previously, to go between the viewer and the designer, you would have to either click a button from within the viewer, which would then launch the designer, or exit the report from the viewer and then relaunch it in the designer. Now we can easily flip between both modes. Of course, assuming that the user has the appropriate permissions to use the design mode. So for instance, if I decided I needed to make a change to this report and I was in the reader, I can click on design, and it immediately flips over to design mode that quickly. Now that we're in design mode, this would actually bring me to my next point, which is the changed layout of Web Intelligence. So for those of you who are familiar with Web Intelligence in the Business Objects 3, this obviously looks quite different to you. You're used to seeing something that's laid out similar to like a Microsoft Word or Excel 2003, where you have the toolbars with multiple icons, and then you can choose the appropriate tool in that fashion. And then you're used to having the side panel where you can flip between things like the properties, the structure, the objects that are available from your query, those sorts of things. In this version, it's a little different. They've broken everything out into tabs. So the idea here is that you would go to the appropriate tab for what you want. So for instance, changes to your query. You need to make a change to the query, add an object, add a filter, that sort of thing. That would fall under data access. So I would click on data access, and then under there you can see all of the functions that apply to that group. So if I needed to edit my query, I could click here. This will bring up the query editor that you're familiar with. Not much has changed here in the query editor, with the exception maybe of the data preview window at the bottom, which gives you obviously a preview of your data, so you can get an idea of what it's going to look like before you actually run the query. But other than that, the functionality is the same, and you can even hide the data preview and get it back to what you're used to, with the universe on the left, your results objects above, and the query filters below. I'm not going to make any changes to this query now. I just wanted to show you that's where it was. So we're going to close that out, go back to our report. Also under here you'll find your variable editor. Again, once you open the variable editor, it's very much the same as what you're used to in the existing version of Business Objects. It's just that instead of clicking on an icon on a toolbar, you have to come under this tab and then choose this option here. You can see there's also some tools here. We can change the source, export data. Again, things we could always do. It's just organized a little differently. Formatting, of course, you'll find all those options under Format. So changes to the font of a specific object. So if I wanted to change, the font of something here, this is where I could make that change. Change that to Courier New, which I don't really want to do. So I'm going to change it back. Changes to the borders. Again, once you get into the interface itself, it's similar. It's just how they've reorganized the toolbars into this tabbed layout. It is quite intuitive. I've found at first it may be a little jarring just because it's not what you're used to, but after spending about not even 30 minutes with it, it just started to make sense for me. So at first it may look a bit different, but the learning curve is really not that bad. Other things like analysis, so that's where you find filters, rankings, input controls. If you're familiar with those and you've used those, you can get to those there. So basically everything is just organized into these tabs, and it's just a matter of knowing which tab and then possibly which sub-tab contains the function or the option you're looking for. And like I said, the layout is fairly intuitive, so it's pretty easy to to just make an educated guess as to where something is going to be, and you would be correct. Another thing that's different, of course, is the side panel is gone. Or I should say it's not necessarily gone, but it's kind of hidden. So there you can see I just opened it up and I can close it. We can get to the familiar things like our data elements, document structure, if you've ever used that to edit your document, that's still there. Input controls, if we had input controls, they're still here like they always are. But what you'll find is absent is the properties. So normally in 3 you're used to selecting, for instance, this chart and then coming over here and being able to edit the properties. That's different now. It's actually more of what you would expect from other applications that you interact with in the same way, in that you can right-click on the object. In this case, I right-clicked on a chart, and I'm choosing Format Chart. So here are all of the options that you previously found under Properties. They're just now in this window and organized into different categories. So you can see we can still change the name. We can still change the dimensions just like we could in Properties. The color palette, again, something that we previously would have edited in Properties, is now found here under Format Chart. Titles, the legend, the 2 axes, or in this case the 3 axes. We've got the category axis and then 2 value axes, and then of course the plot area. So all of those things that you previously would have edited under Properties on the left, you now find in this Format Chart window that you can get to by right-clicking on the object and choosing Format whatever. So you would get, if you right-clicked on a table, you would get Format Table. If you right-click on a cell, you'll get Format Cell. Another thing that's kind of convenient is you can sort of zoom in on the sub-element of something like a chart and get straight to the properties for that by saying, so for instance here I'm hovering over the legend, and if I right-click here and choose Format Chart, it's going to jump straight to the legend option. So that's kind of nice. Instead of having to search through the list, if you can visually say, well, this is what I want to change, and then right-click and choose Format Chart there, it'll take you straight to the properties that apply to what you clicked. So that's a little more intuitive, a little more efficient than it was previously. Under the user interface, that's primarily what is different. Those are the major changes. Of course, there are going to be some others, but they're not quite as significant as the ones that we just covered. The next thing I would like to move on to is one of the changes in functionality. I consider it to be a major change. It's something that was viewed as a shortcoming or you know a weakness in 3, if especially if you had training with me. If I did your end user training, I know that I often got questions about what's capable in charts, and unfortunately a lot of times I had to come back with the answer that something wasn't possible because it simply was the case. It was not possible in 3. In 4, I think that the answer will be to those same questions would be quite different. One of the biggest things or problems that we had in 3 was with the axes and the different elements. So in fact, this example that I have right here illustrates what the problem was and how it's now solved. So if you look at the top chart, you'll see that we are looking at the number of incidents opened each month for this period here. And you can see that we've got 2 axes, one that's indicating the number of incidents and one that's indicating the average number of incidents. In Business Objects 3, if you wanted bars and a line on the same chart, they could not share the same axis. So your bars were aligned to this axis and your line would align to this axis. And the problem here, of course, is that, you know, if this represents our average and these are the monthly values, well, we expect the average to fall somewhere within, not all the way above, not way up above, but rather somewhere within the monthly numbers. The problem here, of course, is the scale. It generated a scale on the left from 0 to 30,000 and a scale on the right from 0 to 20,000. So technically this is correct. It's just very misleading because of the difference in the scales. So in 3, we would have to align these scales. So we would have to go into the formatting or the properties, I should say, and then go into the value axes and basically fix the scales. So we would say, well, the one on the left is running to 30,000, so the one on the right also has to run to 30,000. So I would go in here, now change this to a 3, and now that looks correct, but there's some manual intervention there that you cannot get around. So every time you refresh the report, someone has to, take the steps that I just took to make sure that everything is lined up. The chart below shows what's now capable in 4, which is we only have one value axis on the left that runs from 0 to 30,000, and we can plot both the bars and the line on that same axis. So we don't have to have the third axis, or what they would call the z-axis, or now I think value axis 2, to plot the line on. We can plot both bars and lines, multiple of each as well. In this case, we have, one set of bars and one line, but I could have 3 sets of bars and 2 lines, or 2 sets of bars and 5 lines, all plotted on a single axis, and Business Objects will now allow that. So in cases where you want everything to adhere to the same scale, that's possible by tying everything to a single scale, rather than having to deal with 2 separate scales. Now, of course, there are cases where you would want something like this. For instance, if this was indicating a number of incidents and the bar was indicating a duration, then obviously you're dealing with different terms, and you can't plot a duration on a scale that's intended to measure number of incidents. So there are still use cases for the dual axes, but now you're not forced into the dual axes like you were previously. And in cases where a single axis is best, that is now a possibility. There are other things you can do with the appearance of charts that weren't possible in 3. You can add effects to, visual effects that weren't possible. Nothing that would really change the data. This was brought forward because it really has an effect on the data that's displayed. But there are other sort of just visual changes that you can add to dress up a chart, either just to improve its appearance, or possibly to indicate something that you couldn't indicate previously. In addition to the change in the charts, another new feature that we would like to bring to your attention is something called element linking, and that I can illustrate using this report. So again, I'm looking at it in the reading pane here, and there already is some existing element linking. Let me just take a step back and explain what that means. In the previous version of Business Objects, you may or may not be familiar with input controls. Input controls allow you to, or allow the report audience to filter the data that's displayed in the report on the fly. So I actually have an input control here that I can use to show you, and that's this one that we see right here that says affected service. So I can actually choose a specific affected service like applications and click OK, and this report is now filtered to only show me data where the affected service is application. So that's something that a light user can do. You don't have to be a report developer in order to manipulate the input controls. But now they've taken this feature a step further in Business Objects 4 and given us what's called element linking. So basically what they've done is taking the functionality of input controls and put it straight into the report. So you can see these two tables here. I could actually choose to filter based on category. I only want to see the incident category. So I click on that, and now it's applied that filter. And you can see here we've added an indicator to this report so you can see which filters have been applied. So for instance, you can see the service filter that I applied through the input control, and you can now see the category filter that I applied through the linked element. I could also do the same thing here for affected CI. So you can see now I've applied 3. The only one that I haven't filtered on is group. And you'll notice that this looks like these tables, but this little icon is missing, which indicates that element linking has not been turned on. And I did that intentionally so I could show you how it's enabled. So to enable element linking, I need to first right-click. Let's see. Let me turn off all the filtering. So I'm going to reset everything. There we go. Oh, I'm still in the reading pane. Of course, we have to switch over to Designer. So that's the first thing I have to do, is switch from reading to design, because of course in the reader you cannot make changes to the report's design. Now I can. So when I right click now, I can choose linking, and this is where we have the hyperlinking feature, which is something that we came over from 3, so something that you already had in 3, and of course you still have it now in 4. And in addition, they've added the element link. So I'm going to choose to add an element link. On this screen, I could choose which values or which data elements from this table that I wanted to make part of the link. In this case, I only have a single column, so there's only one thing to select, which is assignment group. So I click Next. There's really nothing to change on this screen in this case. I could add a description if I like, but I'm not going to. Click Next. And now the last thing I have to do is explain where I want this filter to be applied. So this hierarchy that I see here is a representation of all the different charts and tables in my report. I want to apply this filter to everything in the report. So I'm just going to click on this one, which of course selects all of the child options, and then I click Finish. and it's been applied. So now I can filter on assignment group, and then I can filter on category, and then I can filter on affected CI type, and then, as I said, with that input control, I can filter on service. And there you go. And then, of course, we have this little table here that lets us know what filters have been applied. And you can see specifically in the case of this chart here that the amount of data that's displayed is far less than it was previously because we've applied these filters. And if I want to remove them, I can simply click reset, and it puts everything back to no filter. And you can see this chart obviously becomes much more complex. And the intention here was that you would apply filters. So this particular chart, by design, it was not intended to be read in an unfiltered state. The intention was that the appropriate filters would be applied, and then it would become much more readable with the appropriate data. So that's how element linking works. That could also work insofar as linking to another report. So that would be more like hyperlinking. So if you use that to drill down into data, so for instance, you have a summary report that gives you high-level counts, and then you click those counts to launch a detail report that is showing you the individual records behind that count from the first report. In 3, we could only do that with tables in Business Objects 3. So you would have to click on a table. Now that feature has been extended to charts as well. So, in the case of a bar chart, I could click on the bar and then see all of the incidents or whatever data it is that's behind that bar. Again, through the same hyperlinking functionality. But now, instead of just being able to apply to tables, we can also apply it to charts as well. That's element linking. The last feature that I want to draw your attention to is something that affects the formatting of the report, and it's style sheets. So if you're familiar with CSS or cascading style sheets, you can now use those to format a report and basically create a reusable format that you can apply to multiple reports. That's available under the Documents Properties. So up here we have File and Properties. If I click on the Properties tab and then choose Document, at the bottom here there's a button that says Change Default Style, and if I click that, I have a few options. I can import a style sheet. So if I had a style sheet that I wanted to apply to this report, that's how I would do it. I would click that, choose the file, click open, and it would be applied. I can export the style sheet that this report is using. So that same thing, you click on export. I would just tell it where I want to save it. I could just call it test CSS and save it, and then I'll get a CSS file on my desktop. And then there is the option to reset the standard default style. So every Business Objects installation has a standard default style. If you were to build a report from scratch, all of your tables and charts, etc., would use the standard style. And then if you wanted to apply your own style, you would have to come in here and make that change. And you always have the option to restore that default style by clicking this button here. So this is good because it makes the style settings of a report portable between reports, which is nice. It does not affect the headers and the footers of the report. It only affects what's actually in the body of the report. So if you have sort of an overall template that you want to use for the report, you still have to have that template report saved, and then use a copy of that template to create new reports in order to have them all have the same header, footer, maybe a summary page, something like that. So the CSS functionality does not allow you to basically take any report and make it look like any other report, including headers, footers, etc. But it does give you the ability to quickly say, make this table use my color scheme instead of the default color scheme or the Westbury color scheme. You can use a CSS file to do that rather than having to go through and individually select the appropriate colors and font styles, etc. You can define that all in a CSS and then just import the CSS, and the tables will adhere to that new standard. And so if you're familiar with CSS, then of course you can edit it directly. So if that's something you know how to do, then you can obviously draw up your own CSS file rather easily and then use that with all your reports. Let's see, that was CSS. That concludes all of the topics that I had to cover. So the next thing I'm going to do now is open up the questions panel and see what kind of questions we got during the session here. Element linking. Can you select more than one of the options, i.e. complaint, incident, categories? Yes. So you can set up the element linking so that you could select multiple options. Again, that's a feature of input controls. Just like input controls where you can configure them to be single selection or multi-selection, you can do the same thing with the element linking. So yes, it's completely up to the report designer as to how that should behave. Another question, is Business Objects 4 getting pushed is an additional purchase? I would let my colleague Rob address that question. Rob, if you could.
Well, it's not pushed. So standard with installation of SMI 12, we deploy the BI4 Business Objects OEM version. Still, SMI 12 is also downwards compatible with the previous XI 3.1 version. So it's definitely not pushed, but the only thing is that for new installations on SMI 12 we advise to move to BI4.
Okay, thanks Rob. We got another question for a new installation of SMI 12. Is BO4 available for download now? Well, that kind of goes back to the last question and what Rob just stated. SMI 12 is compatible with both Business Objects 3 and 4. So it's really a matter of preference as to what's preferred by the customer. Would they rather stick with 3 or would they rather move to 4? Of course, 4 is going to require some additional implementation work if we're upgrading from 3 to 4. So there would be it would be additional service days, but I don't believe that the licensing would be affected. Is that correct, Rob?
Yes, that's correct, Jason. That's covered. The licensing is covered.
Right. So the licensing, you're not right. You don't have to. If you already have a Business Objects license, you don't have to get a new license for 4. At least not if you're getting Business Objects from us, from Westbury. But of course, if we're doing the upgrade, then there's going to be additional days involved there. So with that said, that concludes this webinar. Thank you for attending, and everyone have a great day. Bye-bye.